Good afternoon. Welcome. We're pleased to have you here for another event of the Assam Fares Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs. We're delighted today to have Dr. Saad Eddine Ibrahim as our speaker in a talk which is sort of a follow-up talk to the one he gave about just over a year ago when he was here talking on a panel about civil society in the Arab world. And the subject today is, can democracy be promoted from within the Arab world by Arab institutions? And what is the experience that he has had in that area? Dr. Ibrahim is a respected and experienced sociologist, professor, spent many years at the American University in Cairo, and recently has been living outside of Egypt and now is in Istanbul for a semester. And he has a long record of political and civic activism in the region. He was one of the first people who pioneered studies of minorities in the Arab world, for which he was often criticized by governments and other people. He's been a courageous pioneer in many fields, including election monitoring, promotion of democracy, culture, education, all kinds of issues related to democratic processes within the Arab world. And he was also attacked for that politically and served some years in jail on charges that were later proven to be false. And we're glad that he got out of jail repeatedly and hopefully won't go back again. But he's been a leader and a pioneer in this field of promoting democratic and civil society institutions. He was the founder and he's director of the Khaldun Center in Cairo, and most recently was one of the founders and is on the executive committee of the Arab Democracy Foundation, which is based in Qatar, which is an intriguing new effort that is looking at promoting democracy from within the Arab world using Arab resources. And he has a very good perspective on that because for years he has been doing that. And he's also partnered with colleagues and like-minded people from the Western world, from the U.S. and Europe and other places. So he really knows the democracy promotion process from all of its angles and is very well experienced in this field. So we're delighted to have him with us at AUB, and I will turn it over to him so he can talk for maybe 30 minutes, 40 minutes maximum, whatever. Me or your wife will wave to you when it's time to stop. And we look forward to your talk, and then we'll have a question and answer period. So join me in welcoming Dr. Saad Eddine Ibrahim.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming. And thank you, Rami, for your very kind and hospitable introduction. The topic for which I'm supposed to address today is promoting democracy from within the Arab world. And the choice of the title, I suppose, was because there is a promotion of democracy in the Arab world, but from outside the Arab world. And this has been recently associated with George W. Bush and the American administration that began in 2003, 2004 to talk about democracy promotion in the Arab world following the 9/11 events in New York and in Washington. And that drive to promote democracy had a mixed reception, but mostly negative reception in the Arab world, and probably for good reasons. Suspecting the motives of that drive by the Americans. America has a despicable record in this region. The West in general has also equally despicable record in the Arab world. So promoting democracy, promoting anything from outside the Arab world is always suspected, is always questioned by Arabs, and probably for good reasons. So that being the case, also our rulers, for their own reasons, other than the citizens, have also joined in casting doubt on any call for change, even from within, by blaming it or blaming the advocates for change, for reform from within, accusing them of being agents of the outside, of being agents of foreign powers, of carrying foreign agendas. And that predates even George W. Bush. This began some 30 years ago when we started calling for reform. People like myself, a whole generation of Arabs who somehow felt that there is major deficits in this part of the world, and the main one was a freedom deficit, which was to be confirmed later on by the UNDP, Human Development Report. But many of us, a whole generation, discovered that back in the late 70s, early 80s. And it is because of that that we started establishing some pan-Arab civil society organizations, such as the Arab Organization for Human Rights, the Center for Arab Unity Studies. So many similar organizations was started by a generation in the late 70s, early 80s, and until today we continue. And the latest of which I will devote much of my talk to, is the Arab Democracy Foundation. But let me just preface the main topic by saying who and why is this suspicion, and how do we handle it? Because sometimes we throw as they say, you throw the baby with the bath, or whatever the saying go. Sometimes we will reject things on grounds that either we are suspicious or on grounds that it came from the outside, even if it is sound. And the outside-inside debate has been going on for the last 2 centuries plus. From the time that the Arabs, not to mention the Muslim world, discover how backward it is with the French expedition back in 1798, all of a sudden the Arabs in this part of the world, Egyptians, Syrians, Palestinians, discover that they are far behind, that they have missed on 4 centuries in which Europe had made its big leaps forward. And we were completely isolated, insulated, stagnant. Later on, we explained that as being part of the Ottoman Empire, and therefore we were cut off from the mainstream of world civilizations. For the first time on those 4 centuries, from the 1500 to the 1900. So all of a sudden we discovered that we are far behind. And from that time, there was a debate. What do we do about our backwardness? And the call for reform began very early on, immediately after that French expedition and that shock of discovering how backward we were. Of course, since you had no way of measuring whether you are backward or not until you see the other with a capital O, Arabs were stagnant, but they didn't know that they were stagnant because there was nothing to measure against. But with Napoleon, with the forces, with the French, with the advancement, with the new weapon systems, with new technology, with the print, with all kinds of things that were new to the Arabs at that time, then they began to realize how. And from that realization, they began to raise the question, what to do? And from that time on, the debate began. One is, let's emulate the West, learn from the West, since they are so far ahead of us. And that was one school of thought. Another school of thought was the exact opposite. No, we became backward because we strayed from the straight path of our tradition, of our religion, of our heritage. And therefore, the way forward is to hold on to our old tradition, our old ways of life, but just do it authentically, do it right. So that was the two competing schools, an indigenous call, and then one that was calling for learning from those who are ahead of us. And of course, as usual, when you have two opposites like that, there is always a third school of thought that tries to reconcile authenticity or the indigenous with learning from the outside. And these three schools of thought have been typical of much of our history in the last 200 years, from the time of Napoleon until today. All right, having said all of this as a background, I want to jump to the present time. When some of us began to call for human rights, protection of human rights, it was, in fact, after the invasion of this country, the invasion of Lebanon in 1982. When some of us demonstrated against the Israeli invasion of Lebanon, we were brutally crushed. And some of us was even much older, people in their 70s, 80s, and so on, who demonstrated on a Friday, after the Friday prayer, objecting to the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. They were crushed by their own security forces. And that was an eye-opener for a whole, shall we say, intelligentsia elite in several Arab countries, in Egypt, in Algeria, in Morocco, and elsewhere. So they began to say, well, here we're even the right to be angry at an invasion of a fellow or a sister Arab country like Lebanon. Our own rulers crush us and treat us this way. That was a wake-up call that made the Arab intelligentsia, or at least part of them, think that we have to go back to the drawing board. At the time, the fashionable thing was independent development, South-South solidarity, all kind of big, nice slogans. But we said, before we do all of the above, we have to call for our basic human rights, the right to be angry, the right to scream. And that was the beginning of the thinking about establishing an Arab amnesty called the Arab Organization for Human Rights. Why? Because until that time, if Amnesty International reported violations of human rights in any of the Arab countries, the regime quickly accuses Amnesty of being a mouthpiece for old colonialism, for old imperialism, knowing that, people are aversive to anything Western. So Amnesty International would be always quickly accused by the likes of Saddam Hussein, the likes of Sadat, the likes of Gaddafi, if criticizes even legitimate, obvious violations. Like, let's say, the massacre in Aleppo or in Syria, or any violation in killing and executions in Libya or whatever. Quickly, they will accuse Amnesty International of being a mouthpiece for old colonialism. And that is why we said, let us establish our own Arab amnesty. So, Arab Organization for Human Rights was an answer to this kind of ready accusation of the outside, even if the accusation was justified and well documented and well evidenced. And when we decided to establish Arab amnesty, we could not find a single Arab country, a single Arab capital, that will allow us to have even our first meeting, which was another ironic commentary of the time. And therefore, in order to have our first meeting to establish the Arab amnesty, the Arab Organization for Human Rights, we had to go to the closest land outside the Arab world, which was Cyprus. So believe it or not, the Arab Organization for Human Rights had its birth certificate in Limassol, Cyprus. Some 10 years later, when we moved on to rights of minorities in our midst, minorities in the Arab world, again we're accused, for an agenda again. And in order to have our meeting, we could not find a single Arab capital again. So we went back to Limassol, Cyprus. That became our ultimate shelter. Every time we want to do something, we could not do it in the Arab world, so we'll go into Cyprus. All of this is in the way to tell you, when we began to move from human rights to basic freedoms to democracy, we have the same accusation. Foreign agenda, foreign money, this is an American call, this is this is that. And I'm sure you have heard of all of this. So it is not new to me. Until we said, all right, we will do the same thing as we did with the Arab Organization for Human Rights. We will establish a movement, Arab democracy movement, and we will try to raise or to mobilize resources from within the Arab world to support that movement. And we found that the First Lady of Qatar, a woman by the name of Sheikh Moza, who happened to be very, just like everything in Qatar, very dedicated to the question of democracy, which surprised many of us, but we welcomed it. She and her husband invited those Arab Democrats who were looking for a place, said, don't go to Cyprus again, come to Doha this time. So for the first time, one initiative, Pan-Arab initiative, found an Arab host city at least, Doha. So we went to Doha, and we said, all right, let us see what we have to do to establish this foundation. We need resources, and we will rely exclusively on Arab resources as to ward off the accusation by Arab regimes who do not like democracy, who do not like human rights, who do not like anything except themselves. We want to ward off because, unfortunately, many people, when they hear this kind of allegation, at least some of them would believe it. So we wanted to make sure that we don't give them that kind of pretext. So some 500 democracy advocates, some of whom are in this room, managed to have 2 meetings in Doha, which hosted us, and to establish this Arab Democracy Foundation. And I will just talk briefly about what the founders envisioned for that foundation. They envisioned the foundation to rely on indigenous Arab resources, that being rich doesn't mean necessarily being bad. Some rich people are good people. Some rich people are well-intentioned. Whatever motives make them well-intentioned, I don't know. But if they are, and if they're willing to support this kind of drive, we will welcome it, so long as it's not conditioned, so long as we are clear about our objectives, our means, so long as everything is transparent. And when we laid that down, we found some responses from well-to-do Arabs who are willing to earmark and to devote some of their resources to this foundation that now is called the Arab Democracy Foundation, ADF. It is a year old. It was established at the end of May last year, and now it is building its own infrastructure. It has 3 major objectives. One is to be grant making to any initiative that sounds credible and effective grassroots, that if they need resources, this foundation will provide the resources. So grant making is the first objective of this foundation. The second objective is democracy promotion through the media and through education. Establishing, consolidating, spreading the culture of democracy, or a democratic culture. Respect for diversity, respect for opinion of others, settling differences by peaceful means, monitoring, supervising, elections, and so on. So that is the second objective, is to promote democracy by words and by deeds. And the third objective is research. Some of us are academics, so they cannot completely do anything without thinking of research dimension to it. So research is the third objective of this foundation. So that is the story of the Arab Democracy Foundation. Now, looks innocent enough to you? Does it? Does it? But not to my government in Egypt. Even though I was doing this in Qatar, the government of Hosni Mubarak in Egypt immediately said, oh, this organization is a sinister organization. This is an organization for regime change, and it is an American idea funded by the oil money in the Gulf. So all of a sudden we found a new interesting combination, the Gulf money and the American sinister design for regime change. Could you believe that this is exactly what the media in Egypt said about this foundation? And since I was one of the founders, I had to be also blamed for all of this. So immediately a hate campaign started, and immediately members of the ruling National Democratic Party began to file cases against me in Egyptian courts of having schemed, being participant in all kinds of conspiracies against my country, Egypt. And because of the hate campaign and because of these cases, when I was still abroad, I hadn't even gone back to Egypt after all of this. There were some other circumstances that even added to the outrage of the regime. Well, I forget to say that out of the 500 participants in the Doha founding meeting, there was about 100 Egyptians. Egypt being the biggest Arab country, obviously, the share of participants from Egypt was bigger. But it happened to cover all points of the political spectrum, from the Muslim Brotherhood to Egyptian Marxists. Everybody who is an active in politics, everybody who shared at least an idea about participatory governance or participatory politics was invited to that meeting, regardless of his other ideological affiliation. Now, the regime in Egypt could not even gather this kind of collection or this kind of pluralistic community in Egypt. The fact that it came to Qatar, again, was kind of an alarm to the regime. So everybody who attended the Doha meeting was accused, and some, upon arriving in the airport, were arrested for participating in a foreign alien conspiracy against their country. That had happened also some 30 years earlier with the Arab Organization for Human Rights. Of course, some extremes were in Iraq when they were killed immediately in the airport. Not even out of the airport, in the airport, 2 of them. But at least in Egypt it was a little bit more civil. They were just arrested and thrown in jail for weeks or several months. So that is the story of the Arab Democracy Foundation. Some have paid immediate price, fellow Egyptians who participated. Some like me, myself, I was advised to stay out of the country for the time being until these cases somehow are settled one way or the other. We are continuing to build the Arab Democracy Foundation. I invite each one of you to take interest in this new movement. We should not be discouraged by the resistance to the call for democracy. We believe that this deficit has to be rectified if the Arabs are to move beyond just lamenting the past or bashing the outside or feeling sorry for themselves, a sense of victimization. We believe, as an activist, I believe that we have to do whatever we can do for ourselves, for our children, for our grandchildren. And we should not wait for Godot, we should not wait for autocratic rulers to rectify or to correct themselves. We have to demand, we have to work, we have to join the third wave of democratization which has swept the entire world since 1974. With a revolution in Portugal back in 1974, some 100 countries from all cultures, from all races, from all religions, have managed to move from non-democratic systems of governments to democratic systems. And therefore we say there is no Arab or Muslim exceptionalism. The Arabs are not an exception to the rules of history or to the rules of social science. We are capable of being democrats as Arabs, as Muslims, as third worlders, like some 70 other countries have. And when I say 70, I mean 70 in the so-called South, countries in the South. I'm not counting even Central Europe or Eastern Europe. But what other people are capable of, so are the Arabs. And that's why I have faith that if we persist, if we carry on, we are, inshallah, we are entitled to see a better future, if not for ourselves, at least for our children, for our grandchildren. I will stop here and open the floor. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Saad. Open the floor for comments, questions. I'll take the prerogative to ask the first one. What makes you feel that you and your colleagues who started the foundation, what makes you feel that these kinds of actions, grants, education, and research will actually make a difference in the power structure that exists in the Arab world that seems to resist real democratization?
One, faith. Al-Iman. I am an optimist, yes. And I have seen the rest of the world change. And if Zimbabwe can challenge their autocrat and force a runoff election, the Zimbabwean ruler actually had been in power for 28 years, one more year than Mubarak. And Mubarak is the third longest ruler in the history of Egypt. And the history, recorded history of Egypt, 6,000 years. We had 3 rulers. One, Ramses II, was in power for 44 years. Muhammad Ali was in power for 42 years. And Hosni Mubarak III, who has been in power for 27 years. But if it can happen in Zimbabwe, which did not even exist when Egypt had its first democratic parliament in 1865. Many of you probably do not know that. Egypt had its first parliament in 1865. Even for Germany became a country, before Italy became a country, before many of the European, like Eastern Europe, Southern Europe, before they became either countries or became democracies themselves. So Egypt had that record behind it. So is Iraq, by the way. So is Tunisia. So is, believe it or not, I don't want to mention Lebanon, because Lebanon had its democracy with all its flaws, but they have. So the fact that many of these countries had in the past, that many of the countries that came far after us have managed to do it, I have faith of doing it. If we have decided in the Arab Democracy Foundation not to preach or advocate violent means, then the other means available are grassroots organization, and that's where we're doing funding, and education, building a democratic culture, and propaganda, advocacy. If you have better ways, share them with us, and we'll consider them. Thank you.
Marhaba, I'm Fuad Hamdan, the director of a newly established foundation like yours, the Arab Human Rights Fund here in Beirut.
Wonderful.
And we're going to support activists all over the Arab world working on human rights issues. I have two questions for you. One is, do you see one country in the Arab world where one should focus some kind of support and grant making to make things happen, and then maybe showcase this country as a country where, okay, if it happened there, why can't it happen in other countries? And the other one is, how high do you see the chances of getting grants and donations from within the Arab world to foundations like yours, or the one I'm heading now?
Thank you, and of course I salute you and your foundation, and I hope we'll cooperate in the future. There are 3 or 4 countries in the Arab world that have already started a serious democratization. A year ago, around this time, there were demonstrations in the streets of Cairo, in Tahrir Square, saying, and you know how Egyptians and Arabs like slogans that rhyme. موريتانيا موريتانيا احنا معاكي ثانية بثانية. موريتانيا موريتانيا احنا معاكي ثانية بثانية. These were Egyptians who had never probably known where Mauritania is on the map, but they heard that Mauritania is an Arab country, and they heard Mauritania had an election or a series of elections that were internationally monitored, and they were judged as free and fair. So Egyptians who had their first parliament back in 1865, before Mauritania even was called Mauritania, were vying, looking at Mauritania as a role model. Next to Mauritania is Morocco, a country that has also started a genuine, authentic march toward democratization. So these 2 countries in the western part of the Arab world are countries that must be encouraged and observed and supported, because building democracy is not a linear process. There will be a lot of curve, ups and downs, and setbacks and so on. But so long as at least there is a committed elite to doing that, and an intelligentsia and a class that can do that, I think it ultimately will succeed. All right. Further, in the Arab world, you have countries in the Gulf that are also have had either a democratic heritage, like Kuwait, which from year 1 of its independence had maintained a democracy, with the exception of the 1 or 2 or 3 years, either of a foreign invasion or of a neighboring war or something. So you have that country as well. You have Bahrain, which has mentioned, declared that it's going to transform itself from absolute monarchy to constitutional monarchy. So we have 3 or 4 countries in the Gulf that are also beginning, and Qatar itself. We told the Sheikh of Qatar, the ruler, when he invited us, he said we could not come and be hosted by a country whose democratic record leaves a lot to be desired. He said, come and you will hear what I will say in the opening. And in the opening, he declared the same thing like Bahrain. And these 2 countries are rivals, by the way. So if Bahrain can do it, he will do it, and he will do it even more methodically. And so he declared that, and he has kept to his roadmap so far. So these are examples, and I'm mentioning these examples from the eastern wing of the Arab world to the western wing, because it looks as if, and this is one of my pet theories, that the change now in the Arab world is coming from the periphery, not from the heart, like Egypt and Syria and Saudi Arabia. That is a dead heart. Autocrats, despots. No, the change is coming from the edges of the Arab world. Luckily, I would welcome it wherever it comes from, but that is the situation. So these are an answer to your question. Now, are there Arabs who will earmark money? Well, we got $10 million so far. We think it is a good beginning. We have pledges of probably as much as another 10 million. And we hope that we'll create an endowment for this new foundation. And out of the endowment, we can do the 3 programs that I mentioned: the research, the advocacy, and the grant making.
And I would like you to answer this question, if you can, as a scholar and as an activist in both positions or points of view. What do you think about the seemingly unsolvable Arab-Israeli conflict and its effect on the progress of democratization in the Arab world?
Mm-hmm. Right. Should we take 2 or 3 more conflicts? Or should I answer one by one?
Let one, and then we'll get others, and then if there's time, that way everybody gets a chance.
Right. The Arab-Israeli conflict has been used, actually, among other things, as a pretext for delaying any democratic reform. That was very clear, and we said that from day one, that conflict has been used by autocrats who have not liberated 1 inch of Palestine. 60 years, they have not liberated 1 inch of Palestine. And yet, all of these autocrats will scream Palestine first. لا صوت يعلو فوق صوت. كلكم حفظتوه. Where did you get that? Assad will say that. Hosni Mubarak will say that. Qaddafi will say that. All the Arab autocrats will say that. We, as Arab Democrats, believe that the only people who will liberate Palestine are the Palestinians. And we, as rest of the Arab world, will stand in solidarity with them. As we said, the birth of the Arab Human Rights Organization was because of Lebanon, because we wanted to stand in solidarity with Lebanon. Same thing. Only free human beings are capable of liberating their countries. But any ruler who will deny his people freedom cannot free another country. So that is where we stand. And that is my opinion on the subject. I don't know if that answered your question or not. In solidarity with the Palestinians, but that liberation of Palestine is for the Palestinians to accomplish. No people in history liberated another people. The rest, freedom fighters, justice, lovers, is to be in solidarity with whoever is fighting his own battle. But you cannot fight the battle of one people on behalf of another.
Thank you for the talk and the intervention. If I may ask a question. First, I start with the observation.
Hold it straight.
The observation that, yes, I do agree with you about the dire condition in the Arab world, UN development, the Arab Human Development Report, authoritarian regimes, etc. But when we do have free and fair elections, like for example in Palestine or in Lebanon, and you end up having another stream coming up, which is a more politically active Islamic streak, then suddenly democracy does not seem to be too appealing. The point that I'm trying to make, or that I would like to make, is the following. There's a certain kind of understanding that we have tried pan-Arab secular type approach to resolving problems and moving forward, and they seem to have failed or turned into autocratic regimes. And there's another alternative that is currently on the market, as we say, which is a more active political Islamic movement that does not necessarily endorse a pro-Qatari or a more secular, educated, research-oriented type approach. And this movement is trying to push forward and do its own achievements. And I would be very interested to see how your center and your policies, recommendations, thoughts, plans incorporate the ideas from those movements that seem to have a large popular base on the one hand. And two, whether some of the concepts that are presented by those movements, whether in terms of shura or in terms of ummah rather than nation and different types of governance, are also considered as part of the indigenous kind of solution. This also reflects the original comments that you made between those who were proponents of mimicking the West versus those who were going towards the, Sirat al-Mustaqim, etc., etc.
Yes. No, that's very good. Are we going to take another question? And then Sari? Well, all the questions I got from AUB today, and I've been to 3 classes so far, were all about the fear of Islamists if we have free and fair elections. And this is good news for Mubarak, that his bogey argument of creating fear of Islamists has penetrated the hearts of Oyubites, people at AUB as well. Whether that's his work alone or the work of him and other Western quarters that has been spreading this Islamophobia since 9/11, I don't know. But I do not share that fear. As a Democrat, I'm calling for the inclusion of everybody, including Islamists, who will respect the rules of the game. And one of my arguments in rejecting the so-called Arab exceptionalism, that somehow the Arabs are different creatures or the Muslims are different creatures who are inhospitable to democracy and to democratic values, I say no, this is nonsense, this is racism. And out of the same argument, I say today, there's 1.4 billion Muslims in the world. I don't know if you know that or not. How many of you know that 2/3 of the Muslims in the world today, 2/3 are living under democratically elected governments? How many knew that? Raise your hand. Only 3, including my wife, who has heard that argument several times. So only 2 in the audience, 2 new faces. But, nobody thinks about that. You have Indonesia, the biggest Arab country, democratically elected government. You have Malaysia. You have India, that has 150 million Muslims. You have Bangladesh. You have Pakistan. Well, Pakistan is a question mark, but anyhow, if you want to, you have Turkey. You have Nigeria. All of these countries are majority Muslim countries, Muslim majority countries.
I think you misunderstood my question.
No, I did not. Just wait a minute. I'm just trying to take advantage of your question to give my other message about exceptionalism. No, I am already answered your question. I believe in inclusion. I believe that these Islamists may have something to offer, but they have to show the voters like they did elsewhere, and I take AKP in Turkey as a model for Muslim democrats. So you could have an Islamic reference point of view, but so long as you accept the rules of the game. Because one of the things against people like yourself who talk or raise this issue is, one man, one vote, one time. That's what they did. To quell the Islamists in Algeria is to make the allegation that these guys will use democracy only to come to power. Once in power, they will never leave. They say no. They have left elsewhere. They have respected the rules everywhere. And that's why I mentioned all of these examples. If the Islamists have something to show, they can show it. If you are believing in inclusion, inclusion means everybody will have his fare, his trade, whatever he can offer, will offer.
Thank you, Dr. Saad. My feeling from your presentation to the Arab Democracy Foundation, that there is assumption that who are the carrier of the democracy in the Arab world, because I'm afraid that the receiver of the grant will be the non-governmental organization. And just, I would like if you can elaborate here, are they can move the democracy in the Arab world, or maybe not? And then where is the unions? Where is the political parties? There is no, I mean, can you make a reflection about a relationship between democracy and social movement? Asif Bayat, for instance, believe that there is no social movement in the Arab world. There is a non-social movement which can carry the democracy. So I think all these issues should be, clarified as a basis of the plan of action for this foundation.
You're right. Well, we will rely on people like you, Dr. Sari, to make this kind of point of view. The grant making is to anyone who is working for democracy and who needs support. If the movement can be on its own, it's fine, that's great. If a political party can be active in its own without needing this kind of resources, fine. No, NGOs, in my own definition, not in the French definition, in my own definition, includes political parties. Anything that is non-state actor is a civil society. And we are dealing with all civil society organizations, from Jam'iyya, community association, to syndicates, to political parties. All the non-state actors are part of civil society. That is one definition of civil society, non-state actors. I know there are other definitions who make a distinction between political party and political community and civil community and so on, but we are taking the broadest possible definition that will serve the purpose of democracy. But yes, we will need the critiques and the evaluation of scholars like yourself to come to help us do our work. I am calling on all of you in this room to be part of that movement. And we gave you some publication. That's not for the Arab Democracy Foundation. That's from another outfit that we also established called the Ibn Khaldun Center, which is Cairo-based. But if you find yourself interested and you want to carry on or be part of that movement, by all means, I welcome all of you. Yes.
I just have a comment. My name is Amr Ali. I'm Egyptian. From the city of Dr. Saad, from Mansoura. I was born in Mansoura. So I just have a very, very simple comment. I'd like to thank him very much for this lecture. I would like to thank him very much for his sacrifice all this long time and all his efforts. I just want to say that we really miss you in Egypt. Thank you.
Thank you.
difficult to ask after this remark, Dr. Saad. So it's
Please do.
Probably I belong to a generation that also we're watching also Dr. Saad Eddine as a liberal in the Arab world. But anyway, you mentioned Zimbabwe and actually I really thought of the same, how many years the president spent there. But maybe you can elaborate, or the foundation you're establishing can also benefit. You mentioned also another 70 countries that have transformed over the last 2 decades or so. But what lessons we've learned from that as an Arab? And what really can we make out of that in order to start the process? Because clearly democracy won't happen overnight in the Middle East or in the Arab countries for that matter. So really it's important maybe to draw lessons as how to start and how to begin. And secondly, I would like to hear your comment where education is placed in the activity of the foundation. Because actually, and this is my own thought, if we do not have a very genuine reform in the education system, I don't see that those generations to come would be capable of actually handling and living in a more competitive, probably, society. Thank you.
Right. Very good. There are many lessons that we are learning and we will continue to learn. And one of the lessons is that it will be a long process and we should not look for quickies or quick shortcuts. We have to be at least steadfast and patient. So long as the process is proceeding, that's all what on track. But if it takes longer to do it right, let us take longer. Number 2 is that we know from the lessons that in Poland it took 10 years. Solidarity, when it started, it took 10 years before they removed the totalitarian communist system from power. In Romania, it took 10 hours. But they were separated by 20 years. So every experiment that came learned from the one before. There's a multiplier effect. In between the 10 years that it took in Poland and the 10 hours it took in Romania, there were countries that took as long as 10 months, others that took as many as 10 weeks, and some that took as fewer as 10 days. But the fewest of them all is 10 hours. From the first outcry for freedom to arrest of the dictator and trying him and executing him. I would rather take the 10 years, but if necessary, I will live also the 10-hour option. Any option that gets us rid of the dictators. The media is very important. That's one of the other lessons that we should rely on. Civil society organizations. And I'm heartened by the innovation of a younger generation of activists, especially in my home country, Egypt. I mentioned in one of or my wife may have mentioned that in her talk yesterday. You are getting overexposed to the one family in these 2 days, but Malishi. Did you mention Isra? One girl, 26 years old, who started on the Facebook, using the Facebook and the blogging technique, she asked fellow Egyptians to strike on April 6 last month. And her call resonated. And people came and struck. And the government didn't know what to do. This is a new technique, a new method that was innovated by this 26 years old girl. The government tried to track down all the bloggers, to arrest as many of them as possible, to prevent the demonstrations, to threaten that it will dox the salaries of people who will respond to this call for the strike. And some people, of course, were afraid, and some people backed down, but there were enough that carried on and honored the strike that it really frightened the government. And they arrested a number of the bloggers, including Isra Abdel Fattah is her name. And as Barbara mentioned yesterday, she was detained for 2 weeks until her mother appealed, and Suzanne Mubarak intervened to release her. But in the process, she became a folk heroine, a folk hero. And also in the process, she was not married. She got 30 marriage proposals. That's what was announced again on the Facebook. 30 marriages. So those of you who also look for that option as well. Yeah.
Hi. I just want to come back to the previous question, to the Israeli problem. I know that this question has been used and overused by rulers in order to, keep their reins and etc. But just to take 2 examples from your own talk. The first one is that everything started in '82 when the Israeli invaded Lebanon. Basically, what also meant that the masses kind of like woke up on this issue, which I think is quite critical. And the second one is the example that Mubarak basically said that you are a pro-foreigner working for the American, etc., and basically indirectly to the Israelis. And this maybe means 2 things, and I wanted to have your thoughts on. The first one is that rights and human rights are very important, but the masses are also affected by this issue. And if people that are fighting for those rights have a strong and proactive opinion on the Israeli issue, can help also, basically making the point even stronger about rights and defending themselves from rulers saying that those guys are working actually for foreign countries, and pro-Israeli indirectly. This issue is I just want to know what's your thought on that.
No, it's an issue that's always used by the rulers. I will be accused of everything that the ruler think will discredit me. And my only hope is that people see through, gradually. All right, Mr. Mubarak, what have you done for Palestine? What have you done against Israel? You are the one who has a relation with Israel. You are the one who has maintained a treaty. You are the one who drove back the Palestinians who tried to break through the siege from Gaza to Rafah. And yet he had no moral claim to say, well, I'm fighting for this or for that. None of the Arab rulers. And I say that with a very clear and loud voice. I fought with the Palestinians. I fought with the Palestinians. He did not. I did. He did not. But I don't like to play out my sacrifice for these causes. But yes, they will continue to do that because I have the media, and I don't have it. However, truth has a way of getting through, no matter how late it may be. So they use everything under the book. But you always ask the question, what have you done? What does everybody, that's always the question you ask. If anybody tries to use this kind of good causes, they بيقولوا كلمة حق يراد بها باطل, قول له what have you done? I know what I have done. Yes?
No, I also meant, there is some, people that relate to the fact that Israel is stopping the Arab world from actually
improving from the dimension of democracy and human rights. Okay. So my question was also directed towards that, instead of only looking to the rulers, and this is one important thing in education, is there something to be done at that front as well in order to protect ourselves from this side and be able to kind of push.
I am not sure exactly the point you are driving at. Are you saying that we should give that issue priority over every other issue?
That's at least the discussion that I wanted to
No, I will not. My opinion is very clear. Those who want to fight the Israelis should go ahead and fight the Israelis. They should have the right to do so. And I'm saying the first one who have that right and duty are the Palestinians themselves. Anybody who wants to volunteer, I did volunteer in 1970 and 71. I was driven out of Amman just with the Palestinian resistance. But don't let somebody like Mubarak tell me what to do as an Arab nationalist or as a pro-Palestinian. He is using that, but he is taking advantage of the ignorance of everybody. You did not know that I fought with the resistance. But I was forced to tell you that because of your questioning. And therefore, I usually stop that kind of futile debate. Which issue comes first? What about motherhood? Why shouldn't we put that value first for democracy? Of course you can put it. Those who want to uphold motherhood, ahlan wa sahlan. Those who want to fight for Palestine, ahlan wa sahlan. Those who want to fight for social justice, ahlan wa sahlan. But don't trade off for me. If those of us who put democracy as an ultimate value, don't tell them no, at least let me have my say. So you can have your say, I can have my say. Is that fair enough?
Yeah, but do we need to choose between the two?
Well, of course. If you have to, choose. If you can do all of them, fine, great.
Let me just, Riyadh, go ahead. Let me just ask a question. In view of the recent experiences of Western countries, especially the U.S. and Britain and others, in their wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, which partly they rationalized by promoting democracy or giving the people a chance to be democratic, and contrasting that with their boycott of the Hamas election and their erratic record in places like Egypt, where sometimes they speak out for democracy, sometimes they're quiet. Given all of these very different and maybe contradictory experiences of the Western world in the Arab region, what's your sense today of the credibility of Western powers in promoting democracy and the efficacy or advisability of working with them? Is it something we should keep exploring, or do you think it should be set aside for the moment?
The reason why we created the Arab Democracy Foundation is to give those Arabs who are very suspicious of the West and of the Western intention, to give them an alternative. They don't have to rely on the West for funding or for moral support. I do not believe in either or. I think, again, as a pluralist, as an activist, I say that every human being is capable of making judgment for himself, for herself, and I'm not going to moralize or to say, no, my alternative is better than yours. I say, let all alternatives act out themselves, and let us judge by the results, by the outcome, and by what people choose for themselves. I have my own suspicion of, not of all Americans, but of certain American administrations, of certain European administrations, but there are also Europeans who are very authentically supportive of democracy, both in their countries and elsewhere in the third world. And I don't have any qualms or any hesitation in cooperating with them. But I say I also know some fellow Arabs, some of my own members of my own family are suspicious. Why? There's the right to be suspicious.
You touched on the issue of the media in the Arab world just briefly, and I'm wondering where you think we're at now. There was a growth in non-government controlled media for a number of years, with Jazeera and others. And then there's been, government backlash and Western backlash against those, the media. Where do you think we're at now, and where do you see the future leading us? Do you think that they are going to continue to be able to play a role in democratization, or have they run out of steam, out of ideas, out of funding?
I should hope not. There are attempts, of course, to close down the Arab public space and the freedom that we have with the likes of Al Jazeera and so on. And you may have heard, I'm sure you have, of the Arab ministers of information. We are the only part of the world, by the way, that has ministries of information. The whole, it used to be the communist bloc, but the communist bloc is gone. So the only one left was ministers of information. That's like Big Brother in 1984. That's what the Minister of Information is all. He wants to control your thoughts, what you hear, what you smell, what you do. And these ministers, on the initiative of Egypt and Saudi Arabia, convened a meeting for the ministers of information, and they decided that the Arab satellites, free or non-governmental Arab satellites, must come under some state control. And they drafted something called a charter of principles for the Arab satellites. When you read that, had a very beautiful preamble about the freedom of thought and the freedom of ideas and so on. You have to read until you get to the middle, where they say, well, first of all, immediately after the preamble, say the media sometimes has been used to corrupt the youth by having decadent programs, nudity, sex movies, all kind of pornos and so on. So they get you to be working up against this kind of media. And they, for that reason, we should have control of it. But you get to the middle, say this media also has undermined our values and insulted the symbols of our sovereignty, our rulers. And therefore, and then you know that this is really basically what the Saudis and the Egyptians are all about, is to protect the rulers of these two countries against the free criticism that takes place in the media. And that's why the only two countries who refused to sign that charter were Qatar and Lebanon. Qatar, the home of Al Jazeera, and Lebanon because of its historical tradition of freedom of expression, and because they don't have a minister. Do you have a minister of information here? No. You do? يخص عليك وليه كده? Shame on you.
I just have a quick follow-up.
Because I asked to have one question only, and it was violated there, but Malish. But please, just one each, so we have time for others. Excuse me, Malish. Pass the mic back over there. In the spirit of democracy, we apply the law equally.
Thank you. I would like to know what, in your opinion, are the major obstacles to promoting democracy in the Arab world? What are the difficulties you expect to face, and how do you expect to overcome them? Big question.
The biggest difficulty is some 20 Arab rulers. If somehow, by a magic wand, we can get rid of them, I think that would be removing the biggest obstacles. The other obstacles could be negotiated. But the biggest one, the stumbling block, are those 20 plus rulers. And I'm serious about that. Because our people want democracy. We have surveys. We have public opinion polling, both Arab as well as international, that shows that over 90% of the Arab public opinion, the people who have been sampled, either by the World Value Survey or by Gallup. There is a new book that just came out this year, about 3 months ago, called Who Speaks for Islam? This is about the Muslim world in general, but a big section of it is about the Arabs. And I forgot to say in an answer to an earlier question, Sitt Maha, is that the 1/3 that is not democratic yet is the Arab third. So the missing 1/3 of the Muslim world that is not democratic yet are all concentrated here in the Arab world. So it is not Islam, but it is the Arab rulers. And that's why I say it is those 20 Arab rulers who are the biggest bloc. Of course, there are other things such as, education, creating awareness, creating kind of institutions that enable people to participate. And I would say grassroots participation is a good beginning. If you can encourage community organizations, associations, that's when you learn the art of democracy. Attending a meeting, knowing how to debate, how to express your opinion like we are doing here, division of labor. These are kind of the organizational skills. The infrastructure of democracy is usually laid down in grassroots organization, community organizations, NGOs, association, professional syndicates, and so on.
Sorry, practically, how will you go about it? Obviously, you cannot remove those kind of Arab leaders. So
Short of overthrowing the Arab leaders or assassinating them,
Which is not an option. Not from an academic institution.
No, and not even from the Arab Democracy Foundation. We made that clear that we are going about our objectives, but if somebody else assassinated them, that's okay. But we as an Arab movement, we will not. That's against our principles. The encouraging grassroots organizations is part of the objectives of this Arab Democracy Foundation. And we're not the only one. There is Mr. Haddad, your organization, and there are other organizations that have been doing this. Ibn Khaldun is doing it, others are doing it. Creating a critical mass of a democratic culture is part of the effort toward democratizing the Arab world. The missing third of the Muslim world is the Arab world.
And one last question in the back. Yeah, all the way in the back there. Yes, yeah. And then
50 years later, is Egypt better off economically?
50 years later. After
58, I'm referring to 58.
After 1952 revolution, you mean? Yes. Yeah.
Because after all, democracy and economic well-being.
I got you. Well, if you're talking about standard of living, definitely we are better off in the year 2008 than we were in 1952. However, if you talk about other indicators, we had a more vibrant free enterprise and a capitalist, a bourgeoisie class that had put Egypt on those days, 1950. We were ahead of North Korea. We were ahead of many countries. We were ahead of Spain in terms of income per capita in 1952. By the standards of 1952, Egypt was better off. If you talk about absolute comparison, the Egyptians are better off, they are better fed, they are better educated, they are better health cared for. But on a comparative scale with other countries, Egypt was ahead of many of the countries that now have 10 times an income per capita as Egypt, like Korea, like Spain.
But is there more equality now?
No.
Thank you very much. We'll stop there. That's been almost an hour and a half. And I want to thank Saad Eddine Ibrahim, and thank you all for coming.